Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest where they are, open and easy. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold, nothing to figure out. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going somewhere cold and white and very still. Somewhere in the winter countryside of Japan, where the snow has been falling since morning and the paths between the houses are deep with it, and the rooftops are buried under it, and the whole world has gone quiet in the particular way that heavy snowfall makes the world quiet. Not an empty quiet, but a full one. A quiet that is made of something rather than the absence of something. There is a small house at the edge of a village. There is an old man and an old woman in that house, and between them, enough warmth and enough kindness to fill a house much larger than theirs. And outside, at the edge of the village where the road begins to climb toward the hills, there are 6 stone figures standing in the snow, patient and still and cold, with no hats on their heads. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Part 1. The Village in Winter. This is the story of the old man who gave his hats to the Jizo, and of what came back to him in the night, and of the particular quality of kindness that gives without calculating the return. Let it carry you gently into rest. The village sits in a valley between 2 low hills, in a part of Japan where the winters are long and the snow comes early and stays late, where the cold is a serious thing rather than a brief inconvenience, and where the people who live here have built their lives and their habits around the fact of winter in the way that people do when they have no choice about it and have chosen instead to make a life that works within the thing they cannot change. The houses in this village are built low and solid, their walls thick, their roofs steeply pitched to shed the snow before it can accumulate to the weight that causes damage, though the snow finds ways to accumulate despite the pitch. And the sound of a roof shedding its load of snow, a sudden soft whomp followed by the whisper of the snow sliding down and falling to the ground, is one of the familiar sounds of winter mornings in this place, heard from inside the houses where the families are beginning their days. The paths between the houses are narrow and run between the walls of snow that build up on either side as the winter deepens, so that by the middle of winter, the paths have become corridors, walled in white, their floors packed hard by the footsteps of the people who use them every day, and the village takes on a particular intimate quality in winter, the spaces between the houses reduced and this community pressed closer together by the snow than it is in the more expansive months. The winter sky over the village is rarely clear for long. Low clouds move in from the mountains to the north and the west, bringing more snow. And the light on most winter days is the flat gray light of an overcast sky, diffuse and directionless, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly simplified, as if the world has been reduced to its essential shapes and left its details for another season. On clear days, when the clouds pull back and the sun appears low in the winter sky, the snow catches the light and sends it back in all directions, and the village is briefly brilliant, every surface white and sharp-edged in the cold air, the shadows blue, the sky a deep cold blue above the white of the rooftops, and the people come out of their houses and stand in the light for a while, as if warming themselves at it before it goes again. The sounds of the village in winter are different from the sounds of the village in other seasons. The snow absorbs the higher frequencies and leaves the lower ones, so that the village sounds muffled and deep, the voices of people calling to each other across the snow carrying differently. The bells of the small shrine at the center of the village sounding clearer and more resonant in the cold air. The creak of the snow underfoot as the temperature drops below the point where it compresses silently. The smell of the village in winter is the smell of wood smoke and cold air, and the particular clean smell of deep snow, which is the smell of water in its purest and most patient form, held still by the cold, waiting for the spring to release it back into the world. At the edge of the village, where the road begins to rise toward the pass that leads over the hills to the next valley, there stand 6 stone figures in a row, the Jizo, the guardian bodhisattvas who protect travelers and children, and the souls of those who have died, who stand at the boundaries of places where the world of the ordinary and the world of something else come close together. These particular Jizo have been standing at the edge of this village for longer than anyone in the village can remember, which is to say, for a very long time, long enough that the stone has taken on the particular quality of very old stone that has stood outdoors through many seasons, softened at the edges, covered in patches of lichen, the carved features worn but still legible, still recognizably faces, still recognizably patient and calm, in the way that Jizo faces are meant to be. Each figure stands about the height of a seated adult, round-headed and robed, their hands held together in a gesture of prayer or blessing, their expressions the expression of something that has been watching over this road and this village for generations and has seen enough to be neither surprised nor troubled by anything the world produces. In winter, the snow collects on their heads and their shoulders and in the folds of their stone robes, and they stand in it with the equanimity of figures who have stood in snow before and will stand in snow again, and who understand that the snow is simply the winter's way of expressing itself, and that the appropriate response is patience. Part 2. The Old Couple. In this village, in a house near the center of it where the main path crossed the path to the well, there lived an old man and an old woman who had been married for so long that the village thought of them as a single thing in 2 parts, the way a pair of tools that are always used together come to seem like a single tool. Their names were not remarkable. The old man was called Oji-san by the village, and the old woman Oba-san, which are the ordinary words for grandfather and grandmother, and which Japanese people use for elderly people they are fond of regardless of actual relationship, and which, in this case, had been in use for so long that the couple's actual names had been largely forgotten by the younger generations of the village, and remembered only by their exact contemporaries, who were few. They were poor, in the honest and undramatic way that many people in a village like this one were poor, not desperately poor, not hungry, not without shelter or the basic necessities of life, but without excess, without reserves, without the comfortable margin between sufficiency and difficulty that makes difficulty, when it comes, something that can be absorbed rather than something that threatens. The old man made straw hats, the wide, flat hats that farmers wear against the summer sun, and that travelers wear against the rain, woven from the rice straw that was abundant in the valley after the autumn harvest, and that he had been working with his hands for so long that the work was as natural to him as breathing, his fingers moving through the familiar motions without his having to think about them, the hats taking shape the way they always took shape, one after another, patient and practical and useful. The life of the village in winter organized itself around the fact of cold and the fact of darkness in ways that were different from the organization of the warmer months, more interior, more domestic, more centered on the small spaces of the house and the fire and the things that could be done without going out into the cold. The men did what outdoor work was necessary, tending the animals, clearing the paths, bringing in wood, checking on neighbors who were old or ill, and then came inside, and the evenings were long and quiet, the work of the hands continuing by firelight, the conversation unhurried, the particular quality of winter evenings present, which is the quality of time that has been slowed down by the cold and the darkness to a pace that is different from the pace of the other seasons, and that some people find oppressive and others find restful. The old man was of the second kind. He had always found winter restful, had always found the long evenings conducive to the kind of slow and careful work that the hat making required, the fingers moving through the straw by the fire, while the snow fell outside, and the house made its small sounds of warmth and occupation. He made hats through the winter months and stacked them in the corner of the workroom, and watched the stack grow, and thought about the spring markets when they would be sold, and found in the making of them a satisfaction that was not dependent on the selling, the satisfaction of work done well, of the straw taking its shape under his hands, of the finished hat sitting in the corner with the other finished hats, each one complete and useful and made with care. The old woman supplemented this with whatever other work she could find, weaving, mending for neighbors, the preservation and preparation of food, the small commerce of a household that has learned to make the most of everything available to it and to waste nothing. Together they managed, which is the accurate word for a life that is maintained through constant attention and effort, without ever quite achieving the ease that would allow the attention and effort to relax. They managed, and they were grateful for managing, and they did not spend much time thinking about what they did not have, because the what they did have was enough for the living of a life that was, in its modest way, good. The house was small and warm in winter, the aurori burning steadily, the walls keeping out the worst of the cold, the stored food adequate for the winter months ahead, the arrangement of the household reflecting the long practice of two people who have learned to live in a small space together and have negotiated, without ever quite discussing it, the particular accommodations that make such living comfortable. They were kind people, which is to say, they were the kind of people who notice when something needs doing and do it, who give what they have without calculating whether they can afford to give it, who treat the people and the things around them with a consistent care that comes not from effort but from character, simply how they were, how they had always been, the kindness as natural to them as the way they breathed or the way they moved through the familiar rooms of their familiar house. The evenings that the old man and old woman spent together through the winter had a quality that they both valued without ever quite discussing it, a quality of ease and sufficiency that came from long familiarity and from the particular comfort of being in the company of someone who knows you completely and requires nothing from you but your presence. They talked about small things, what had happened in the village that day, what needed to be done the next day, what the weather was likely to do, the small observations and practical considerations of a life lived in close attention to its immediate circumstances, and they were quiet together in the spaces between the talking, and the quiet was as comfortable as the conversation, neither of them requiring more from the evening than what the evening naturally offered. The old woman sometimes sang while she worked, old songs, the kind that had been sung in this valley for generations, songs about the seasons and the crops and the small events of ordinary life, sung in a voice that was no longer what it had been, but that still carried the quality of the songs themselves, which were not grand songs, but were true ones, and which filled the house on winter evenings with a sound that was both very old and very present. The old man listened to her sing with the pleasure of someone who has heard the same songs for a very long time and has not grown tired of them, because the songs were not things to be tired of, but things to be accompanied by, the way the sound of the river accompanies a person who lives beside it, not always noticed, always present, missed immediately when it is gone. It was the last day of the year, the day that in old Japan was the most important day of the preparation for the new year, the day on which the house was cleaned and the food for the celebration was prepared, and the various things done that needed to be done before the year could close cleanly and the new one begin well. The old woman had cleaned the house with the thoroughness that this day required, every surface wiped, every corner swept, the bedding aired despite the cold, the altar polished and fresh offerings placed before it, and had prepared what food she could for the New Year celebration, which was modest because the resources were modest, but which she had made as good as she could with what was available, which was her way, with everything. The New Year food in Japan is particular. The ozoni soup with its rice cakes, the various small dishes arranged in the lacquer boxes, each one with its own meaning and its own connection to the hopes for the coming year, prosperity and health and happiness, expressed through the careful preparation of specific foods, and the old woman prepared what she could of these with the same attention she brought to everything, aware that the preparation itself was a form of hope, that the act of making the New Year food was a way of saying that she expected there to be a new year worth celebrating. But there was one thing missing that made the preparations feel incomplete. There was no mochi, no rice cake, which was the essential centerpiece of the New Year meal, without which the celebration would be diminished in a way that could be felt, even if it could not quite be articulated. Part 3. The Journey to Town. The old man said that he would take the 5 straw hats he had finished to the market town, which was not far, 2 hours' walk on a clear day, a little longer in the snow, and sell them, and with the money buy mochi for the new year. The old woman said that the snow was heavy, and the road would be difficult, and the old man said that the snow was indeed heavy, but the road was known to him and would be manageable, and that the hats needed to be sold in any case, and today was the last day before the new year, when the market would be open, and so he put on his warmest coat and his straw sandals, and took the 5 hats under his arm and set out. The road from the village to the market town ran along the valley floor for the first part, and then climbed over a low shoulder of hill, before descending into the broader valley where the town sat. And in summer it was a pleasant enough road, well traveled and familiar, with the mountains visible on clear days, and the rice paddies green on either side in the growing season. In winter, and particularly in the kind of winter that this day offered, the snow still falling, not heavily but steadily, the light gray and flat, the temperature cold enough that the breath made clouds that hung for a moment before dispersing. The road was a different thing, less pleasant and more demanding, requiring attention and steadiness, and the kind of patient tolerance for discomfort that the old man had developed over many years of going out, in weather that did not invite going out. He walked with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knows that the distance is fixed and that hurrying does not shorten it, but only makes the walking harder, and he noted as he went the things that were worth noting, the way the snow had accumulated differently in the protected places and the exposed ones, the tracks of animals crossing the road in the night, the particular quality of the light in the snow-covered fields on either side, which was not bright, but was luminous in its own way, a soft white light that seemed to come from the snow itself rather than from the sky above. He had made this walk many times, in all seasons, and knew it the way he knew the work of his hands, not thinking about it, but doing it, the road, familiar enough that his feet found their way without requiring much direction from his attention, which was free to be elsewhere. He thought about the new year, and about the old woman waiting at home, and about the mochi he would bring back with the money from the hats, and about the year that was ending and the year that was beginning, with the particular thoughtfulness of someone who is old enough to understand that each new year is a gift rather than a certainty, and who receives it accordingly. The market town, when he reached it, was busy with the particular activity of the last day of the year, people buying and selling with the urgency that deadlines produce, the market stalls doing their best business of the season, the air full of the smells of food being prepared and sold, the sounds of commerce and conversation mixing with the sound of the snow that was still falling on the rooftops. Part 4. The Unsold Hats. He walked through the market with his 5 hats, offering them to the people he passed. And the people he passed looked at the hats and shook their heads, or walked on without stopping, because on the last day of the year the things that people wanted to buy were food and paper and incense, and the decorations that would mark the new year, not straw hats, which belonged to the working season and not to the season of celebration. He tried the stalls where such things were sometimes bought and traded, and he tried the people he recognized from previous trips to the market, and he walked the length of the market and back, and no one wanted the hats, and by the time the light was beginning to go from the sky, early, as it always went early in this season, he had sold nothing, and it was time to start back. He stood at the edge of the market for a moment with his 5 hats under his arm, and thought about this, not with distress, not with despair, because he was not a person given to distress or despair, but with the practical attention of someone who is assessing a situation and deciding how to respond to it. There would be no mochi for the new year. This was a disappointment, and he felt it as a disappointment, particularly on behalf of the old woman who had worked so carefully to prepare the celebration and who deserved to have the centerpiece of it present. But disappointments were part of life, and he had had enough of them to know that they were survivable, and that the new year would come regardless, and that the old woman's company was a better gift than any food, and he turned and started back along the road toward home. 5. The return. The road home was longer than the road out had been, in the way that roads are always longer in the return, when the purpose of the journey has not been accomplished, and the cold has settled deeper and the light is going. The snow had been falling all day, and the road was deeper now than it had been in the morning. The familiar landmarks changed by the accumulation, the surface soft and yielding underfoot in a way that made walking more effortful, the cold more penetrating now that the exertion of the outward journey was past and the body was cooling. He walked steadily as he always walked, and the valley was very quiet around him, the particular quiet of a snowfall at dusk, when the light is going and the snow is muffling everything and the world is in the process of closing itself for the night, and there is a quality to the silence that is different from daytime silence, deeper and more complete, as if the world has decided that the day is over and has begun to put itself to rest. He was thinking about the old woman and about the new year, and about nothing in particular, in the way that the mind moves on a long familiar walk, when he came around the bend in the road near the edge of the village, and saw the 6 Jizo standing in the snow at the side of the path. He had passed them many times, going and coming on this road, and he always looked at them as he passed. Not with particular ceremony, but with the acknowledgement that they were there and that they mattered, the way a person looks at something they respect when they pass it. Part 6. The Hats. Tonight he stopped. He stopped because of the snow on the Jizo's heads, the heavy accumulation of a full day's snowfall, sitting on the stone heads in thick white mounds that must, he thought, be cold, in the way that he thought about cold as something that could be given and received, not only by living things, but by anything that was out in it without protection. He looked at the 6 figures standing in the snow with snow on their heads, their stone faces patient under their white burdens, and he thought about the 5 hats under his arm, and the thought was simple and direct and did not require much consideration. Here were heads that needed covering, and here were hats, and the connection between these 2 facts was obvious. He placed a hat on the head of the first Jizo, fitting it carefully over the rounded stone head, adjusting it so that the brim would shed the snow rather than catch it, and then moved to the second, and did the same, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. 5 hats for 5 of the 6 Jizo, and when he reached the 6th, he stood for a moment with empty hands, looking at the last figure which still had its burden of snow, and no hat to relieve it, and, without particular hesitation, he removed the cloth towel that he had wrapped around his head under his hat against the cold, and folded it, and placed it on the 6th Jizo's head, tucking it in at the edges so that it would stay. Then he stood back and looked at the 6 figures with their new hats and their cloth, and he said something quiet to them, not a prayer exactly, but the kind of thing a person says when they have done something that feels right and want to acknowledge the feeling, and then he continued home through the snow. Part 7. Coming Home. The old woman was waiting when he came through the door, in the way that she always waited when he had been out longer than expected, not anxious, because worry was not her disposition, but attentive, the particular quality of attention that people have when they are waiting for someone they love, in weather that makes travel difficult. He told her about the market, about the hats that had not sold, about the mochi that he had not been able to buy, and she listened without interrupting, and then said that it was all right, that they had enough, that the new year would come regardless, and that they would meet it together, which was the important thing. He told her about the Jizo, about the snow on their heads, and the hats he had given them, and the cloth from his own head that he had given to the last one, and she listened to this with a different quality of attention, not the practical attention with which she had received the news about the market, but something quieter and more considered, the attention of someone who is taking in something that they recognize as significant without being able to say exactly how. She said that he had done right, which was not a complicated thing to say, but was said in a way that meant more than the words themselves. And then she went to heat the soup that was waiting on the fire, and he sat by the irori and warmed his hands and feet, and they ate their simple meal together in the quiet of the last evening of the year, with the snow still falling outside, and the fire burning low, and the house warm, and the world outside very still. Part 8. The Night. They went to sleep early, as they always did in winter, when the darkness came so completely and so early that staying up felt like an argument with the natural order of things. And the warmth of the bedding and the low sound of the fire were an invitation that the body found difficult to refuse. The last night of the year had a particular quality in this village, not festive, because they were not prosperous enough for festivity, but ceremonial in a quiet way. The awareness of the year closing and the new one beginning, present in the darkness of the room, as the old man and old woman lay in their bedding and listened to the snow and the fire, and the particular silence of a winter night in a village where everything that needed to be done had been done, and everyone was resting. They had each said the things they said at the end of each year, gratitude for the year that was ending, for its sufficiencies and its ordinary goodnesses, and hope for the year that was beginning, expressed in the simple and sincere way of people who do not expect too much, and are therefore genuinely grateful for what arrives. The fire burned lower as the night deepened, and the room grew cooler, and the snow continued to fall outside with the patient persistence of snow that has been falling all day and has not yet decided to stop. And the old man and old woman slept in the way that people sleep when they are tired and have clear consciences and warm enough beds and each other nearby. It was in the deepest part of the night, the hours past midnight, when the village was as completely asleep as it ever got, every house dark, every fire low, every person in their bedding, that something moved on the road at the edge of the village. It moved with the particular care of something that is carrying things, and does not want to disturb the people it is passing. A careful and deliberate movement through the deep snow, accompanied by a sound that was barely a sound. The soft compression of snow underfoot, a sound that was more felt than heard, and something else, something that might have been the sound of stone moving through snow, patient and unhurried. The 6 Jizo came down the road from the edge of the village, in the way that stone things move when they have been given occasion to move, slowly, steadily, without drama, with the same expression on their round stone faces that they had always had, which was the expression of things that have seen everything and are surprised by nothing, and find in the world, as it is, enough to inspire a quality of feeling that is not quite happiness, but is something in the same direction. They carried things that they had gathered from wherever such things come from when they are called by an act of pure kindness on the last night of the year. Things that were heavy enough that the Jizo moved carefully under their weight. Things that were, in the way of gifts that arrive in stories, exactly what was needed and more. They came to the house of the old man and the old woman, and they set down what they had brought at the door, and around the door, and in the space before the door, carefully, quietly, with the consideration of guests who do not wish to wake the household, and when everything was placed as it should be, they stood for a moment in the snow before the house, their stone faces looking at the door, their hats and their cloth hat still on their heads, the snow falling around them with the same patient indifference with which it had been falling all day. And then they turned and went back up the road to their places at the edge of the village, moving through the snow with the same careful, unhurried movement with which they had come. And when they had reached their places, they stopped and became still again, the way stone things become still, completely and immediately. And the road was empty, and the village was asleep, and the snow continued to fall and cover everything, and in the morning it would look as if nothing had moved at all. But something had been left. Before the door of the house where the old man and the old woman slept, in the snow of the last night of the year, there were now things that had not been there before, things that the old woman would find when she opened the door in the morning, and that would make her call her husband's name in a voice that was not quite steady, and that he would come to and stand beside her and look at for a long time without speaking, in the particular silence of people who are receiving something that exceeds what they had asked for and what they had imagined receiving. Part 9. The Morning. The morning of the new year came the way winter mornings come, gradually the darkness thinning at the edges before the light properly arrived, the cold at its worst in the hour before the dawn, the house very quiet and the fire needing to be rebuilt from the coals that had kept through the night. The old woman woke first, as she usually did, and rebuilt the fire and set the water to heat, and did the small ordering of the morning that she always did before calling her husband, the household resuming its daily shape in the particular order that long habit had established, and that she performed without thinking, her hands and her feet knowing what to do next before her mind had quite caught up with the fact of being awake. When the morning was sufficiently established, she went to the door to look at the snow and to see what the New Year's morning had brought in the way of weather, which was always the first thing to know on a winter morning in a place like this, since the weather would determine the shape of the day. She opened the door, and the cold came in with the clean smell of a winter morning after a night of snowfall, and the light came in too, the particular pale light of a winter morning when the sky is just beginning to show its intentions for the day, and she looked out at the new year and saw what was there. There was rice, a great deal of it, more than they would use in many months, in bags that sat in the snow before the door, with the self-possession of things that know they are exactly where they should be. There was mochi, the rice cakes that she had wanted for the New Year celebration, stacked carefully in the traditional way, round and white and perfect, more than enough for the celebration and beyond. There were vegetables and fish and the other things that make up a New Year's meal done properly, all of it arranged with a care that suggested it had been placed by hands that understood what was needed and had taken the time to provide it fully. And there were other things too, things that spoke to a generosity that went beyond the immediate need, things that would make the months ahead easier in ways that the old woman and old man had not dared to hope for, provisions against the cold and the lean season that lay between now and the spring. She called her husband, and he came and stood beside her in the doorway and looked at what was there, and neither of them spoke for a long time, because the appropriate response to something like this is not words, but the kind of silence that is itself a form of gratitude, full rather than empty, complete rather than insufficient, the silence of people who have been given more than they can express, and who understand, without being told, where it has come from. The old man looked down the road toward the edge of the village, to where the 6 Jizo stood in their row in the morning snow, and he could see from here, even at this distance, that they were still wearing their hats, the 5 straw hats and the cloth, and that they stood in the New Year's morning as they always stood, patient and still and calm, their stone faces turned toward the road and the valley and the world that lay beyond. He bowed to them deeply, with a full seriousness of the bow, holding it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and the old woman beside him did the same, and the New Year's morning was quiet around them, and the snow that had fallen in the night lay clean and unbroken on the road between them and the Jizo, and the light was beginning to come into the sky in the east, with the particular quality of the first light of a new year, which is the same as the first light of any other day, but carries in it, for the people who are watching it, something that other lights do not carry. They brought the gifts inside, the two of them working together in the easy, practical way of people who have worked alongside each other for many years, and the house filled with the presence of more than it was accustomed to holding. And the new year began in the warmth of a house that was, for the first time in a long time, fully provisioned, and with the particular quality of contentment that comes from having been given more than you asked for by something that does not require thanks, but receives it anyway. Part 10, The New Year. The New Year's meal was made that morning with the proper care and the proper ingredients, and the old man and old woman ate it together at their small table with the awareness of people who understand that they are eating something that is more than food, that the mochi and the soup and the other things on the table carry in them a meaning that goes beyond their ingredients, a meaning that has to do with gratitude and with the continuation of things and with the particular sacredness of the first meal of a new year, eaten in a warm house with the person you have shared your life with. They talked about ordinary things, as they usually did, and they were quiet together in the way they had always been quiet together. And the new year began with the same quality of ordinary goodness that their years together had always had, except that the house was fuller than it had been for a long time, and there was a quality of ease in the morning that was new, a sense of not needing to calculate quite so carefully, of having enough and more than enough. That was itself a kind of gift that went beyond the visible gifts stacked inside the door. In the afternoon, the snow stopped, and the clouds thinned and pulled back, and the sun appeared low in the winter sky, and sent its light across the snow-covered valley in a way that turned everything briefly golden before the cold took the light away and the long winter evening began. The old man went outside in the afternoon light and stood for a while, looking at the valley and the hills and the Jizo at the edge of the road, and he felt something that he did not have an exact word for, but that was something in the direction of completeness, a sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing, in a world that was, in its patient and ancient way, aware of what happened in it. And so the story of the Straw Hat Jizo settles into the stillness of the New Year's morning, like snow settling onto the quiet road, like the warmth of a fire that has been burning through the night and is still burning when the morning comes. The old man and the old woman were real, in whatever way such things are real. Real as the cold of the last day of the year was real. Real as the 5 straw hats under the old man's arm were real. Real as the particular quality of kindness that gives what it has without stopping to ask whether it can afford to give it. Stories like this one carry something true in them about the nature of kindness, that it is not a calculation, that it does not ask what it will receive in return, that it moves from some place that is prior to thought and deeper than intention, from the simple recognition of a need and the simple response of meeting it with what is available. They carry something true about the Jizo themselves, those patient stone figures at the edges of roads and paths throughout Japan, standing in all weathers with their steady expressions, present in the places where the world of the ordinary and the world of something else come close together, neither demanding attention nor refusing it when it comes. They carry something true about the new year, about the way that the turning of the year is a moment of possibility, a threshold where things that would not happen at other times become possible, where kindness given on the last night of the old year can return on the first morning of the new one in forms that exceed what was given and what was expected. Let these things rest in you now. You have traveled tonight through the last day of an old year in a snow-covered village in old Japan, down a familiar road in heavy snowfall with 5 straw hats under your arm, past the patient stone figures at the edge of the world, and home again to a warm house and a simple meal, and the quiet company of someone you have known for a long time and will continue to know. The Jizo are still there, at the edge of their road, as they have always been, standing in whatever weather the season brings, wearing their hats against the snow, their stone faces turned toward the road, with the steady and unhurried attention of things that have been watching for a very long time and have not yet finished watching. The old man and old woman are still there too, in their house near the center of the village, going about the ordinary business of their ordinary days with the same quality of care and attention they have always brought to it, neither more nor less than what is needed, consistent and reliable, and, in their quiet way, good. And the new year is still arriving, as it always arrives. First as a darkness, and then as a lightning. First as the end of what was, and then as the beginning of what will be. Patient and unhurried and certain, the way things are certain when they have been happening for a very long time, and have every intention of continuing. Let it all soften now. The snow-covered village and the narrow paths between the houses, the 6 stone figures standing at the edge of the road, the old man walking home in the late afternoon with his empty hands and his full heart, the gifts arranged in the snow before the door on the first morning of the new year, the warmth of the house and the meal and the company of someone who has always been there and is still there. Let it dissolve gently, like snow melting in spring, like the smoke from the morning fire, rising into the cold, clear air and disappearing. There is nothing left to hold tonight, nothing to figure out, nothing to carry. You are warm, and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. The Jizo are patient. The winter night is kind. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night.